All right, everybody. This week we have a very special guest. Professor Kurt Maroki is the professor of double bass at Jacob School of Music at Indiana University. Professor Maroki, it's such an honor to have you here.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much.
Great. All right. Let's talk about way back, right? When you
Yeah.
first started learning music, you started on the violin, and you still play the violin. I saw a video on your website. It's the media. You're practicing on the violin. Technique's great. It's insane. But what made
Well,
you switch?
well, that's the thing. Violin is I think the violin is one of the hardest instruments to play. Because for the same reason, of course, that pianists, have a lot of competition. There's a lot of competition on the violin. Technically, it is all about precision. So if I was to compare the violin to the bass, everything is expansive. You know what I mean? Everything is bigger proportioned. So you can really go into the details of, okay, this is exactly what you do. Violin, it's like, okay, that's out of tune. Yeah, it's really
Yeah.
a difficult instrument.
Hmm.
So I think for me, it was a couple of things, the pressure, of competition. Um, and the other reason for switching off the violin is because I just don't think I would have gotten anywhere. I was thinking about going to the University of Hawaii, which would have been nice, but I think Juilliard's a little better when it comes to schools,
Oh
for
yeah.
music. So yeah. So
Interesting.
that's yeah.
But for me, I think of like this way, right? So we have like this supply and demand, right?
Yeah.
And then yeah, violin is way more difficult, but there's a lot more players and a lot more jobs out there. And then switching back to double
Yes.
bass, right? We have less players, but a lot less jobs, right? So
You're
how did
right.
you feel about that when you switched?
Well, my teacher was extremely picky when I went to Juilliard. Before that, I studied with a tuba, saxophone, jazz bass teacher in Maui. He was basically the only teacher in Maui for bass. And he said, well, why don't you try it? And I didn't love it. I loved playing the violin. I didn't love playing the bass. And so there was less pressure in a way. I don't know if that makes sense. And because of my violin training early on, I think it really helped my bass playing. So I'm always, whenever I come across bass players that have played the violin or played the cello or played another string instrument, they have a much broader viewpoint. So they're well, ahead of a lot of other people in terms of that. So I think that gives you a little bit of an advantage. I think every string player should play the bass, to be honest, and I think every string player should also play the violin, as to see the range of what is possible on a string
Yeah,
instrument.
I was talking to a friend of mine who plays cello yesterday. I was saying,
Yeah,
you guys are so different than like wind players because every wind instrument is like a complete different instrument. But for strings, if you look over, for someone who never had any music experience, just in terms of different sizes, we have the bigger violin, we have the smaller violin, and we have something called viola, which is like a mid-sized violin, right?
oh, those are fighting words. No,
So, well, it's interesting. Is there like any huge overlap between, the violin and the bass?
there's a lot of overlap, and I think bass players tend to separate themselves from the rest of the string family. But there's a lot of overlap. So one of the major things is, of course, bow control. Um, Having a straight bow, really important. We teach that on the bass. It's taught on the fiddle. Um, the idea that the hand is flexible and it can pivot, the idea of sensitivity. I mean, oh my gosh, you got to be sensitive to play the bass. It's not just, grip it and hit it. So it's a sensitive instrument. And it can be just as sensitive as the fiddle. The biggest differences are what really separates the instrument. So string tension. The difference between the string tension is just a huge deal. So on the bass, it's like playing on a rubber band, whereas on the violin, you just do that and it makes a sound. The bass, you have to prepare the string a bit with the bow, the type of rosin, the length of the bow, the proportion of hair width to string length is way different on the bass, and of course how we hold it. But other than that, and of course tuning is different, but the rest of it is kind of the same. The way you use your fingers, the sensitivity needed, being able to having the right position. Oh my gosh, I mean, it's all the same.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
lot of physics, a lot of science.
it's all physics. You can't fight physics. That's what it is for every instrument, right?
Yeah, every instrument. Yep,
Yeah,
wind instruments, string instruments, regardless. Very
yeah,
interesting. Yeah, I think there's some younger kids listening to my podcast. I don't think they realize how much of a learning experience it really is to play an instrument, regardless of like what instrument you play.
oh yeah,
It ties with everything possible you can think of in life. It teaches you a lot of different things. It teaches you about,
sure.
as we just talked about, a lot of physics, a lot of really subtle things you would apply to any like math, science, anything in life. It's fascinating. So yeah, kids out there, start learning instruments ASAP.
It's like being a brain surgeon, but nobody's going to die.
I like that. I like that. I like the way you put it. Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah.
So that's really what it is. And the other part of it is, we're allowed, we always have to be very careful about the words we use at all times. We have to be very careful because the reactions to certain words are extreme. And these are just words. The old saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, that's not a modern idea. But with music, we can say anything. We can say absolutely anything. And that's really the difference, is that there isn't that extreme reaction if we make a mistake. Nobody's going to die if we make a mistake on the instrument. And I think that's a beautiful thing, that we can connect with more people through music than through words, in a way, in a more intimate way. At least and I think that's very important to remember, is that the idea of communication is everything. That's what we do. We communicate.
I never thought it like that. I heard someone before I interviewed saying, it's a universal language, but not in a way that it makes communication easier and better. So
It
that's a
does.
very powerful statement. Yeah, I guess less politics within musical language, right? Instead of words. Yeah.
There still is the reaction, but I think the reaction normally happens between professionals, because otherwise you will either love something or just not listen to it. But there isn't that negative reaction in the public usually, unless they're reacting to a specific set of words being said or being sung.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If I don't like classical, I would just not listen to it.
that's it.
I wouldn't comment on it. I don't
Right.
care. I don't care. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Great.